Hola, buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a esta tercera y última mesa de las jornadas.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this third roundtable. Thank you to all of you who are attending this afternoon session. We will try to make it very interesting, especially for students. We will be talking about translation profiles that are, of course, very interesting to students. It has often been said that translators cannot be part of newsrooms. We have a lot of journalators. As an example of this, in the current media, some news agencies have important roles. Very significant amount of news in the international section are automatically translated with tools. I've also heard the comment by a journalist saying that they receive newsletters and notes that come in languages that they don't speak. Specifically, German press releases that they don't speak German and they just have to automatically translate it and then review it as best as they can. Nonetheless, we will be hearing from the speakers of this roundtable. It is true that translators can be part of newsrooms, of the media, any genre. In journalistic translation has to be taken into account. Translators not only undertake interlinguistic translation, but also intralinguistic translation, corporate communication, and what we now call transcreation, advertising, etc. We are eager to hear from our panelists who will be touching upon these matters among others. Our first speaker is Elea Jimenez Toledo from the Scientific Council. She is a translator and has a degree in documentation from the University Carlos III. So you have the floor, Elea.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you to the European Commission, the DGT, and to the University of Salamanca for organizing this very important event, this interdisciplinary event. I come from the field of documentation and I'm here. I feel at home at the Faculty of Translation and Documentation. What can I tell you this afternoon in this session? Well, I'm going to be bringing forward the academic point of view, the scientific production point of view, and how all of this is reflected in the media, and which would be your role as translators in this area. To begin, in a complementary manner to what was said this morning, I am going to be referring to the diversity of scientific documents and spheres in science. We work differently. This morning we talked about international publications, fully acknowledged publications that are very important for researchers, but we have to know that apart from this scientific production that is channeled through these international publications, a majority, as we have seen with the Scopus data, there are different ways of communicating that normally are not in the media, they're not talked about in forums such as this one, but we are talking about different ways of conveying scientific knowledge. If we look into this data, that reflects the scientific production in CSIC from 2017 to 2020, we can see that the global amount of articles produced by scientists within CSIC from natural resources, medicine, biology, humanities, social sciences. We can see, for instance, that natural resources, biology, physics, and technology of materials are published through these international scientific publications, the majority of them in English, that allow us to communicate with our peers, with those who research the same areas. And you will see also that there's a small box within these scientific publications. Well, we have humanities and social science. If we look into this data, I don't want to overwhelm you with figures, but in humanities and social sciences, in international publications in English, there's a lot, but also within national publications in the different languages. Why is this? This morning, the colleague from Universidad Jaume I mentioned this. If we are serving our closer circles, our society, we try to tackle current concerns, it is more natural to us to use our own language and our resources, in this case, national publications. This is a role of scientific communication that has to be present to us. As researchers, we will have to debate and talk to researchers from other countries, and it is natural to use English. But for instance, if I am studying or researching for the publishing houses industry here in Spain, I will talk to the experts of this industry through forums, books, and events to be able to convey knowledge to this industry. For this reason, national languages are essential to be able to convey knowledge. It is a commitment that all researchers make. Within the public sphere, researchers aim at serving society, and this communication has to be protected. It is very important to bear it in mind. If we look at how scientific results are communicated through academic publications that are barely mentioned in the media, when we talk about science that is published by Spanish researchers, we always see these figures that I was showing before in Scopus and Web Science, but we don't see that hidden part, which is national scientific publications in different languages and in academic circles. Especially here in the green box that is humanities and social sciences. Where do we publish books? Well, within this sphere, and also with regard to natural resources and agricultural sciences. We will have researchers, colleagues, who are assessed by their collaboration to publications, but also with regard to the production of these books. More than half of scientific works are published in languages other than English, practically in all languages of the European Union, Hungarian, Polish, French, Italian, all of these languages are there. What should we know about this? science is produced through these channels. This science, these results should also be reflected in media through scientific journalism, and not only focus on the largest international publications in science. If you follow this field of expertise, well, we have Nature, The Lancet, and a couple more publications that are often mentioned in the media. And this is only a part of scientific publications, and in this regard we need to pay attention to science that is published in other media and in other languages. This, well, is the focus of the Helsinki initiative, multilingualism in scientific communication. It refers to the need of protecting publishing infrastructures, such as national scientific publications, publishing houses, media that deal with the science that is produced in the different languages to be able to reach the wider audience. This science that is signed and supported by many institutions highlights multilingualism and, well, is the synonym of a future for all of you. We need to rescue the contents of these sources, take these contents to the media in a journalistic format to be able to disseminate science. This morning we mentioned the automated translation tools. They have improved, they are still improving, but as you can see here on the slide with this example, we have mistakes, limitations. For divulgación científica, DPEL offers the option of scientific dissemination. If we translate science popularization, it is translated as divulgación científica, so there seems to be a correspondence between source and target, and Google translates science popularization as popularización de la ciencia, when we normally don't use that. We use divulgación de la ciencia in Spanish. Terms that might be considered as technicisms, but in reality are part of our everyday language, don't find the right translation in this kind of tool. The same goes for expressions such as colecciones de libros. This wouldn't be book collections in English, it would be book series. And as you probably know better than myself, they don't have the same acceptance and use in Latin America, or maybe in Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico. They will understand colecciones de libros as book collections, but in other countries, no, it depends. This is an article by a professor from the University of Salamanca, who might even be in the room. There's a reference to the difference between journalistic translation as interlinguistic or versus intralinguistic to make it more accessible for the general public, referring to the need of creating local versions of these technicisms. We have matters that have to do with context, sociology, culture, that can make us understand terms differently, even if the language is shared, the context might be different. The communicator is not just a neutral transmission line, it is a creator of a new sense that can understand knowledge as it is contextualized in the social setting. It is interesting to mention this when we talk about technicisms and terminology. The term popularización isn't included in the IAT database. We've referred to this before, but I wanted to use it as an example. Obviously, it is one of the multilingual resources with the most value. I just wanted to show you with this that these systems need to be connected to multidisciplinary corpus that are also related to scientific literature, so academic texts related to reports, articles that will allow us to identify new terminologies that will be incorporated into these systems and that might help us also identify the parallel term in other languages. This is another term that does appear in the IAT database, publishing house. The translation offered is Casa Editorial, but it is widely used in Mexico, Argentina, etc., not in Spain. And in this case, the Latin American denomination has prevailed. This highlights the need to work with scientific corpus, literary corpus, all these documents that have to be included in different sources, the constitution of corpora to analyze terminology and to be fed into all these systems that will help you convey scientific news is a practice that demands being aware of reality. Science is channeled through different sources, and we have to include these sources within our sources to analyze and assess. We have some sources that are related to machines. Let's think about the research centers and university repositories with a huge amount of text. Many have overcome the quality thresholds by experts, also with the intervention of automated versions that can also undertake machine analysis, and also with Creative Commons licenses that allow us to reuse these sources. Identifying terminology, and especially neologisms, is very important to be able to analyze these corpus. It is a support to automated translation and also a support to human translation. If you have a doubt on a technicism and you check articles or any of these sources, you will be able to solve your doubt. These sources for you have to be considered as essential to check information. With regard to identifying this terminology and by using the technology that we have available to us, we can carry out a potential analysis of this information that might be interesting to all of us. The possibility of analyzing scientific data within open science so that a linguistic term can be interconnected with other terms in other systems. This will allow us to recover more terms from more sources and more terms associated to source texts. I wanted to mention as an example the triple European initiative that is set within the open knowledge framework, operas. It is working on a system to recover scientific texts from different fields of expertise. Its peculiarity is that it is a multilingual system. It is not mature yet, with a term in a specific language, and thanks to the terminological databases that exist in other languages. Let's imagine that we're talking about editorial again. The system will allow us to open the search with other languages, including maison d'édition or publishing house. This will be possible because we have been working on the terminology in different languages. And as we were saying in the previous session, the development of full validated quality terminologies in all different languages is possible also because these terminologies are connected to the data web. Without these sources, we won't be able to have access to multilingual bodies, and we need to also take into account that we need to have a global vision. In human sciences, we always encounter different ideologies, political standpoints, and we need them as journalists, but also as researchers and as citizens. We need to be able to have access to this plural approach to research, not only accessing media that follow a specific ideology. Finally, to wrap up, before we were saying that some scientists communicate through international scientific publications in English, and this is interesting, especially with regard to national and local contexts. And this is something that language processing experts are working on, tools that allow to generate multilingual summaries. So if we, for instance, have an article published in a scientific publication in English, will maybe with this tool allow us to create an automated summary, also to be able to move forward with the project that we have in Barcelona regarding Spanish. This is interesting because it allows us to disseminate research that might have been carried out in Spain but written in English, and for those of us who speak Spanish, we would be able to access these contents thanks to the automated generation of summaries that is getting better and better. Finally, the use and development of terminologies in the different languages. This is a terminology project in Spanish. One of the potential applications beyond the production of science in our own language and also automated translation projects has to do with the support towards automated classification and index systems. When we're talking about summarizing the content of a book or through keywords, these systems in one language can help us undertake an automatic classification, and this means that it is easily recoverable through search engines, etc. Working on the terminology in one language can have different impacts in the digital spheres. It has also benefits for translators, for researchers, and we have to pay attention to these areas so that we can follow up on future developments and see how we can use these tools within translation or scientific communication. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Elea. Muy interesante. Luego tendremos ocasión.
Thank you very much. We will have the occasion to comment a few more things about your presentation later. We're going to give the floor to María José Fernández Herrero, who comes from the University of Malaga. She holds a PhD in philology, and she has published many publications on this topic, on translation and journalism. And she also works in the field of literary translation.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Before anything else, I wish to thank the organizers of this meeting, the University of Salamanca, the European Commission, for kindly inviting me to be present in this event. I'm going to tell you about the professional profiles of people who work in the media. The journalism sector has experienced very drastic changes in this century, mostly due because of the boom of internet, the digitalization of the audiences, the appearance of social media, among other many aspects. This is an ever-changing sector, and a sector that calls for lots of translation, and in this sector professional profiles are very diverse. When we talk about the journalism sector, first thing that comes to mind are journals, newspapers, press, but this is a sector that is much wider. We also have magazines. There are thousands of magazines, and some of them are very, very specialized, and they're present in many parts of the world, and there are editions in many languages, and translation is very present. This sector also includes news agencies. The large news agencies work as information agencies, but they also work as translation agencies in a way, because they also provide information in other languages. We also have what is known as syndicates. These syndicates create content, sell the content to other media, and often they also distribute them translated. The digital era brought about multimedia platforms, that great portals that bring together written format with audiovisual format. Many of these platforms also include editions in other languages which require being translated. Let's think about portals like Al Jazeera and BBC, CNN, and so on and so forth. And lastly, there's something else that is considered journalist translation. For example, the press releases published by large companies or institutions. Often, these press releases are translated. So, we are talking about a very broad sector, and the professional profiles of people who translate in this sector are very diverse. Let's simplify. I have created three large categories. The first one would be that of translator journalists or journalist translators. Those who are translating within the media, that is, they are part of the in-house staff in those media. Another large category would be that of translators, whether we're talking about freelancers or people who work for agencies that are specialized in journalists. I don't know if you know the agency News Clips. There are newspapers like El País or ABC that work for this with this company. So we're talking about translators who are not working as in-house translators for the newspapers. And then we have a third category of diverse miscellanea translators. These may include computer experts, doctors, etc. There is content that is very specific and requires very specialized people. And large newspapers also have specialized sections like science, economy, etc. And you need specialists to try to translate this. I don't know if Kiko Llaneras rings a bell from El País. Well, Kiko Llaneras holds a PhD in engineering, and he is in charge of data journalism. Since I don't have much time, I selected three examples. The first example is from El País, which is the journal that has been more researched in terms of translation. When the material makes it to the newsroom in El País, they make two large categories. One that is instant documents, and the other one is non-instant documents. Instant documents is that is the materials that need to be published immediately, because otherwise it won't be news anymore, it won't be current. So those documents that make it to the newsroom, and usually in other languages, sometimes it's already translated from other language through agencies. Well, that needs to be turned into a piece of news in Spanish, and it's the translators, journalists in the journal itself that are in charge of that. For example, leader in a country just made a statement in that language. That information will make it to El País and instantly becomes a piece of news. The person has to translate that statement. Maybe this journalist will provide some context, and these journalists will see the immediate reactions to those statements, for example, in social media. This process of translation that will give rise to a piece of news in Spanish remains invisible. And probably there won't be any signature. The translator won't sign, and just an editor will sign it. But this piece of news wouldn't be possible without the mediation of that, without that translation process. We're talking about instant material, and then we have non-instant material that can wait. For example, if it gets there in the morning, it can be published in the afternoon, or it may wait until next day, or sometimes even weeks or months. And this material is usually opinions or more elaborate reports or articles. And often this is commissioned to agencies like news clips. We have seen two profiles: the journalist translator and the freelancer that works for a company or an agency. And then we have those other specialized profiles, people who are specialized in very specific sections. Here we have an example from each of these cases in El País. I'm going to give you another example. Here we have a syndicate. It's called Project Syndicate. Project Syndicate is specialized in distributing articles, opinion articles. It requests articles from outstanding or renowned journalists from different parts of the world. They distribute they get the articles in different languages, and they're in charge of translating it. I'm gonna show you the website of Project Syndicate. If we go to the information that they provide here at the end of the website, I need my glasses. Here you see the 15 languages that they translate into. We're talking about the main Western languages, but they also include Chinese, Hindi, Bahasa, Arabic. So the scope of these articles of opinion is very global. On the bottom here you see the distribution figures. These figures are very outstanding. These articles make it to every point in the planet, but not all articles are translated into these 15 languages. If the writer is very relevant and the topic is very current, they may be translated, but some other content is just translated into 4 or 5 languages. It depends on how interesting it can be in different parts of the world. If any of you is interested in joining this world, you have to be really proactive and searching if you want to be active here. Well, you can come here to careers, and often they have job offers. Right now they're looking for an editor and a data analyst. But you have to check this website constantly because sometimes they have openings for translators. How do they work with their translators? Well, I'm going to tell you about the case of Spanish. It's the one that I am familiar with. They have a roster of about 7 Spanish translators, not only in Spain, but also from other countries in Latin America. And lately are working with a company called Translation. When they get an article in English, they give it to one of the translators. They usually have around 48 hours, and once the job is placed, they receive the translation, and they are in charge of distributing it. All of this is done through email. The profile of the workers, of the people who are in charge of translating these articles, is that of a translator. I am going to show you one last example, the one that I selected. It's a very specific example. Here we have BSoccer, a digital native media. It's specialized in sports information, and more particularly, it's specialized on soccer. The audience is huge. I invite you to check this website. Most people who access this information do so through an app, through their cell phones. Pieces of news are usually short, and they usually include audiovisual content, like, for example, short videos, interactive graphs. This company is established in Malaga, and I really know how they work. For some time, our students did their internship in Bisoccer. It started in Spanish, but right now they have an edition in French, English, Portuguese, and Italian. We have the testimony here from some translators who work for Bisoccer. In Bisoccer, they hire technical profiles, they hire journalists, and they hire translators. What's the job of these translators who work for Bisoccer? Vitoria García Alarcón, one of the journalists in Bisoccer, was telling us that she had to translate news, but not only translate news, she also had to translate audiovisual content, graphs, images. She had to draft news based on content in other languages. She had to edit and proofread pieces from other media. She was also in charge of doing the quality control of the website and the mobile app, and she had to do the maintenance of social media and social media updates. So if you work here, you have to translate, but you also have to work as a journalist, and you need to know about digital content. Since things seem to be working well, I'm going to go to this website, Bisoccer, and if you click here, you're going to see the jobs tab. And well, yesterday was the last time I accessed the website, and I saw that they have openings for a technical position, and also they're also looking for a French editor. The profile is very diverse. They are looking for someone who has a degree in philology, languages, and then there are job requirements. A native French speaker, a good level of Spanish, and being familiar with soccer, obviously. Why is this profile so broad? Because the editor who joins the company will work as a team member and will be trained in a team. This team will teach this person how to write a piece of news, and this person will learn by doing. I don't know if I've gone over my time. I'm going to start wrapping up. And I want to finish with some final remarks, very short final remarks. This is my... Okay, I'm going to go back to my presentation here. Okay, some closing remarks. The journalistic sector is very broad. We tend to think about newspapers, but there's a lot beyond newspapers. It's a sector that keeps changing and evolving and growing. In this sector, we have very diverse profiles, and we need to bear in mind that those of us who live in this technological era, many newspapers have become digital, and of course, translation skills are necessary, but you need other skills like skills in journalism, digital skills, and you may also need to be specialized in something specific. That's all I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias, María José, por abrir.
Thank you very much, María José, for being optimistic. There's not also journalistas, there are translators as such too. And I think this is what the next speaker will tell us about Juan Manuel López Guiz, who's a teacher at the Autonomous University in Barcelona. He has translated over 100 books and press articles, and this year he received the National Translation Award to his whole career. I don't think there's a better award than this one, than an award that is given to your whole career. I also want to start by saying thanks to the University of Salamanca and the DGT of the European Commission for organizing this event. I am going to decrease the level in terms of specificity. Maria Jose opened about the profiles in general. I will just talk about my own profile and about what I have done in my working with La Vanguardia. I have been working for La Vanguardia for 35 years. The first translation I did for them was in January 1988. I know what I'm talking about. This is the front. You can see that the aesthetic is somewhat oldish. It was a long ways. Here you have some of the people here. Bush father. Nobody remembers him here. I will tell you about the type of text that I translate. This was my first translation. I started translating for the cultural issue. It was released on Wednesdays and it was called Ideas. It was directed by Ramoneda. Then for some years, and there was a very interesting sector dedicated to science and technology. And I also translated many texts that were very interesting and that were very diverse, on very diverse topics. Then we had the cultures supplement. It was a supplement that was like a separate issue, and there were many articles on art, literature, etc. This supplement still exists. It just published its 1000th issue. And then within the newspaper for Opinión, also translated for the international sector, here we have an article by Robert Fisk during the war in Iraq. And here we have the international section. I've also worked for economy, for the economy section. And they publish a quarterly issue that has articles from foreign. In the beginning, it just had some foreign journalists, but now they're all foreign, and I've translated them all. The originals are in English and in French. And La Vanguardia signed an agreement with The Economist, and they are publishing 2 articles a month from The Economist. And these are one of the last articles that I'm doing for them. We have the quarterly newspaper that it's usually 130 pages, and then we have these weekly articles from The Economist that usually have 1,200 or 1,500 words. Sorry, I'm talking about words, not about pages. And the articles from The Economist usually are published in the international section or in the economy section, and are published in the subscription only section. They're not open, and they're not in the printed edition. We have heard about this. We have heard about something about the limitations of press translation, about printed press, and that's something that I want to elaborate on. I also want to say that when I saw the website of Interlabored Syndicate, I was shocked because the first articles that I did for them at the end of the 80s or beginning of the 90s came to me as a black and white fax that was hardly readable, and you had to kind of like guess what the end of it because you couldn't see it. Now with The Economist, they just send you a hyperlink, you get there. So we've come a long ways. Things have changed a lot. So there are 2 main limitations that aren't only a problem in press translation, it's just something that used to be really common. On the one hand, we have the space limitation, and this is not something specific in press because there are many other translation sections where this happens. For example, subtitles, comics, books with many images and small text. For example, in Darling Kidlinser publishing house, there is a very rigid space limitation. So this space limitation, it's not only a problem in press, but but of course this was a problem when press was just written. So when you got, in the old days, when you got a job, you had to translate, but you also had to reduce the text a little bit, because we have to take into consideration that when you're translating from English into Spanish, there's usually like a 15% increase in the size, in the space. Here we have a source text that was 1,500 words, and when you translate it, it increases and you have to shorten it so that it can fit in the newspaper. So often in the press room, when they saw that the text was being too big, they would ask you to summarize it. I got the translations that could not be done by the translator journalist that was working in-house, the person who was in charge of the urgent translations. I would get the ones that were urgent but not so much. This space limitation disappears with the digital era. It doesn't make sense to have these space limitations. Time is the other structural limit, but it's not only something that affects journalistic translation. Translation for agencies, for commercial purposes, they're always constrained by time, and this is also the case in press, in newspapers. And then we have the specificities of each text. And in the international sector, sometimes you have this urgency, but when it comes to culture, in the case of culture, you usually didn't have urgency. Some that's considered urgent is some that is that has a 3-day turnaround time. During the invasion in Iraq in 2003, the newspaper decided to publish the chronicles sent from Baghdad. Baghdad was being attacked by US bombs, and we were getting the chronicles that Robert Fisk wrote, and he sent them to the Independent, and we would get them from the Independent. So we always knew that we would get a message from Fisk. It usually made it on Friday. If we were lucky, it would make it before 6. This wasn't only the case, and you had like around 2 hours to translate a text that would be around 1,200 words, or maybe a little more. In principle, these texts were published the next day when the British newspaper would be out already, but La Vanguardia reached an agreement so that the text would be published on the same day in both newspapers. Afterwards, I met Robert Fisk, and he told me that he sent the articles from his hotel room, being really cautious, and he would dictate on the phone the article to someone at the Independent, and at the Independent they would like write it, and we would get it from there. At the Independent, well, often and in general, they would talk, the articles often talked about weapons, and you had to really research about different types of vehicles or different weapons. I asked an artificial intelligence to draw an image of that scene, and this would be Robert Fisk in his hotel in Baghdad dictating the articles. The digital context, as I was saying, freed us from the space limitations, and also it made times more flexible because the presses don't need to start working at a specific time. So you don't really need to run that much like we did in the past. Because in the past it was like you had to make it at 8, and if you hadn't sent your article by 8, you would get a phone call. Articles can be sent at any time. You send your translation, and the translation may be published in the afternoon. So this, so we see how the world is very instant, very immediate. I want to talk about journalistic language and press translation. And journalist language is very standardized, and there is a series of text categories regarding on whether what prevails is the information, opinion, or a mix of both. In practice, what we find is that limits don't exist that much. So as Lea was saying, what we see in practice is a great diversity in terms of style. Texts usually have different degrees of syntactic density, and sometimes an opinion text may be more simple in terms of its structure than a text in the culture section, but not necessarily. What translators do is to follow the template that the source text defines. The text has already been processed by the editor. And there are many diverse types of texts. We have interviews, for example, the interviews in Project Syndicate really had to be rewritten. They were not schematic, and they didn't adapt to reading conventions. They were not well structured. So we have standard formats like interviews, but then there are other diverse types of texts. We have diversity in terms of themes. Newspaper sections are very diverse. And in the first presentation, we already saw that there are many possible topics, and you can find just about anything. What challenges can you find? Well, there's something that always happens, and that's the transcription of foreign languages that don't use the Latin alphabet. For example, right now we have names in names from Ukraine or in Russian. Then we have the translation of institutions, positions too. Then we have encyclopedic quotations, historic, cultural events, and then terminological problems. This may be easy in principle, but only in principle, because often you find yourself in the trenches of the language war, because often you find words in English that haven't been translated yet. There's no coined translation. For example, gobernanza. The first time you see it, you don't know whether to use it or not, to use the word governance. I remember with the first translations from French, médiatique, I decided to use mediático, like mediatic, and I dared doing it, and this may seem like really normal now, but this was a long time ago. At that time, that word didn't exist in Spanish. For example, with subprime mortgages, I remember I started receiving many economy articles, and in the first one I got, it was probably the first one, I read the term subprime. So after lots of research, and of course that wasn't my field of specialization, I had to do lots of research. So because since there's like political correctness there, and I was like, oh, let's call it this or that, and then I realized I tried to find an equivalent in Spanish, and then it turned out that it was translated. It wasn't translated. The term subprime in English was used in Spanish, and that's what happened. Same thing happened during the pandemic. sometimes you need to check with professionals. During the pandemic, I had to talk to professionals. Here we have the IATE, the database. We have mentioned it many times. We have heard a lot about it. And something that we have also heard is that culture, the texts in the culture section can be really hard, and you run into different challenges. This text that I received from the culture section, it was written by Bruno Latour, a Frenchman who recently died, and I don't understand anything. I don't understand what it means at all. And what I did was to do the same thing. Ecology forces us to rethink science and politics at the same time. We have expressed this double, well, blah, blah, blah.
Está perfecto. No se entiende nada.
It just follows the French very closely. It is perfect. This is also related to some of the teachings in university. To be able to translate, probably you need to be able to understand. Well, not always. This is the example that not always. There's a phrase by Kotzi that says that the literal translation is the last honest resource of the puzzled translator. Sometimes we have to use this resource. Sometimes you have to be more explicit because the source is ambiguous. You have to take into account cultural context. Here we have the mushroom cloud that was included in one of Bush's speeches. We had to make that more explicit in Spanish. This can also be an example of limitations of automated translation programs. This is an example of a person who works in Venice in the Grand Canal and one of the gondolas, and the automated translation tools don't work in this context. Sometimes it's just a direct literal translation that doesn't work because you have to pay attention. And finally, this is a fun article by Pamis that talks about wasting time at work. According to a survey, well, how much time we waste at the office when it's just, about wasting time and corrected email mistakes. This is by Delaware and Maryland, and if you look at the acronym, the Maryland and Delaware Enterprise University Partnership, it is made up, and then the weighted total futility is a WTF, quite fun. And I had to look for an equivalent in Spanish. There was an institution that estimated the assessment of work time, and the Invent Institute, this would be the equivalent in Spanish that I found to solve this made up in the original. And then the weighted and total futility, well, the equivalent in Spanish that I found. This is an example that normally in the press you should not encounter this kind of text, but it's not true. You just have to face all kind of contents. And here, well, you bets wishes. You also have to find the right play on words in Spanish, in the equivalent. And this is not always easy. I want to finish by saying that machines are great. They're just one tool. We won't be able to translate this joke of Alice in Wonderland that talks about the different, well, this joke, that's the reason they're called lessons, the Gryphon remarked, because they lesson from day to day. These tools are good if there's a certain amount of routine, a repetition of what is already known, or the primacy of certain elements, but they don't work with ambiguities, with differences in context, with references, and they fail when it comes to the human component of language, such as, for instance, the play on words. Technology is here to stay, but we also know that with a lower human intervention, the lower the quality of the final text. And we have to take into account that if newspapers and press and institutions want to reach human public and trained citizens, they cannot give in to machine translation promises linked to savings, easiness and immediacy.
12, había dicho 12, ¿no?
I did say 12, right? 12 is what I understood. 12 minutes. Thank you very much for your fun presentation. I think we have time for these 20 minutes that you mentioned that are wasted by white-collar workers. We can also check out the videos from former students of the university. Let's listen to the video.
En traducción y mediación intercultural en la Universidad de Salamanca del 2012 al 2013. Diría 100%.
Apologies, but the sound quality does not enable interpretation into English.
De todo tipo de traducción, hasta hacer amistades de toda la vida. Cuando regresé a Puerto Rico, me puse a buscar trabajo y en realidad
I started looking for a job and I decided to create my own business. It is Ongma Language Studio. We have 7 full-time employees. We also collaborate with 45 contractors worldwide in English, in Spanish, French and Portuguese. We work with a wide array of customers here and in the US, governmental institutions, banks, insurance companies, and advertising companies, as well as media. We look for certain elements with the customers that we have. We look for translation quality among our collaborators, the correct, accurate translations that entail research by the translator. This is something that we see with regard to our competition. We offer quality translations. Among the profile of translators, another important aspect has to do with the use of translation tools, so that also translations are delivered on time, with the need to use technology if the deadline is tight. We have to take into account the amount of translation, the words that can be taken on by a collaborator, so that these estimates are realistic. For me, this is something that motivates me to be able to offer work to people from different contexts and backgrounds, continuing to expand, creating connections, and boosting high quality translation nowadays. Seeming also that written and oral communication is losing strength nowadays. Thank you.
Hola, y ahora tenemos el último testimonio de Alberto Sesmero.
Hola, buenas tardes y muchas gracias por dejarme participar.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to participate. My name is Alberto. I'm a former student of the University of Salamanca. In 2013, I finished my degree in translation and interpreting. I continued my training in the Complutense University. I followed the Masters in Literary Translation and also English at the UNED, and I'm currently following a Master's in Literary Studies. I have worked in several communication spheres, not always directly related to translation, for instance, corporate communication, wherever I found opportunities to be able to use my skills as a cultural adapter. For about, since the last 3 years, I am a full-time translator. I think that specialization has to be closely linked to experience. I try to focus mainly on publishing type translation and my work with international organizations. This is what I've been doing recently. I think in any case, translation and interpretation studies, in my case and colleagues' cases, has provided me with a background of knowledge to be able to face different challenges in the professional field. I think that translation and interpretation has provided me with these famous soft skills that are so important for interviews, the attention to detail, being able to take decisions. I think that all these elements create the basic translator's toolkit. And I think that when you follow your studies at the University of Salamanca, you will have these tools, and to be able to take into account the current situation of the market, obviously these skills sometimes are widened, and I think that as students of translation and interpretation, we have these skills, even if some stakeholders take time to detect them or identify them. I think that the ecosystem of translation, composed basically of the international and national associations of professionals, have taught me a lot. I think these associations are closer to the marketplace. Universities provide you with the training that you need, but associations can help you with, the professional performance, the legal drafting and fair drafting of contracts, the rights of a translator, copyright matters, etc. Different matters that I still continue learning about. The translation ecosystem also, brings motivation to me. I am inspired, my colleagues, I'm learning all the time, and it is a very welcoming profession. For those of you who are thinking about your career, welcome, go for it. It's not an easy journey, but I can assure you that it is a very fun journey. Thank you, Alberto. We now have a few minutes for the Q&A, comments, anything that might be mentioned by the attendees.
Buenas tardes. Mi pregunta iba...
My question is for María José. One of the profiles that you've mentioned was something like data analyst, I think. Could you give us more detail? Yes. Talking about profiles, I was mentioning the translator journalist, the freelance translator, and then other profiles. And I mentioned Kiko Llaneras as an example, who has a PhD in engineering, and he's also a journalist in El País, so a specialized profile. For instance, in the section of economy, we have economists that are journalists and also translators, or in the section of science, well, we have doctors or scientists who translate and also write or collaborate with entity. Any questions? Any more questions? Well, I do have one. I have seen that in La Vanguardia, the articles do include the name of the translator. In El País, the source is mentioned, Newsweek, for instance, but the name of the translator is not mentioned. How can you explain this? Is it up to the translator? Does the translator have to negotiate this, or how does this work exactly? Apologies, but we cannot hear. El País. They've always felt they were better than others. For instance, well, they took time to put the accent on país. They said this was the design, and then they changed the design. It took them 20 years to do this. In the 90s, at the end of the 90s, there was a campaign launched by the Association of Translators, according to which there was a protest sent out to the specific section that gathers complaints, according to the fact that the translator's name wasn't mentioned. And, well, they answered according to the style guidebook. Camilo Valdecans was the editor in those days, and he answered that protest letter, and he said, well, that they were doing things properly. They hadn't included the name of Miguel Sainz in one of his translations, and there was also a protest because editorial achievements, when, for instance, there was an agreement with a publishing house and they published the first chapter of a specific work, the name of the translator wasn't there, never. And for instance, for the, well, a translation of a book by Tom Wolfe, the translator wasn't mentioned, but the illustrator, yes, was mentioned. And the answer was, well, that's it. And this is just hasn't changed. They don't publish the name of the translator. It is the editorial policy. Well, it is unfair, right? Especially if we go into style matters. We analyze certain fragments, especially if we take into account that there's a mediation role. I think this is something that readers should know. And sometimes, well, it might be, well, something can be forgotten, but in general, these names are mentioned. And in general, journalistic translation is not less than literary translation. We have mentioned examples of Nobel Prizes being published, research that have had to be made. I remember it was very difficult to translate an article by Levinas, the French philosopher. It was about Heidegger, and it was very obscure. It was very difficult to, well, you can't research Heidegger just to translate one sentence. You can ask some people that might be experts in philosophy and they might lend you a hand, but especially if you have a tight deadline, we can't know everything. What is important here is method and rigor, and you need to have your tools, and research can be endless. You always add new tools to your craft, but you have to use your doubts, your questions, not only to solve that situation, but also to grow more professionally. Like judo, no? That you use your opponent's strength to be able to be stronger.
Any other question or comment?
Para hacer un comentario.
I wanted to remark something on what you said, Juan Manuel. In the last book fair in Madrid, we organized with the French Institute and the Portuguese Embassy a meeting that was called Le Traducteur en couverture, the translator on the cover, on the book cover, not only to have the actual name of the translator, because it actually is like the author. And sometimes this name doesn't even appear inside the book, in any part of the book. Sometimes you don't even know what the source language was. There are translated versions that haven't been, books that haven't been translated directly from the source language. This is not done by serious publishing houses, but it still happens. So we need to emphasize the importance of having the translator's name on the cover of the book. And obviously, when press articles are translated, the name should always be there. A representative from the from the DGT was there, and although the European Union doesn't have any competences in terms of culture, it does have the possibility of making recommendations, and that was a clear recommendation to have the name of the author. And I remember the intervention of a French representative that talked about a series of agreements that were reached in France to have a policy to recognize the translator's name. So I think we should follow that example, that French example. And to what you said, I want to add something. We have the report called Translator on the Cover, translator, that is the same thing, and the recommendations are similar. And the initial campaign, we have the campaign carried out in the UK by Jennifer Cobb, and the author of, and an author, and they made a joint report to expressly ask for the name of the author on the cover. I want to echo what you said. In the editorial sector, there is this movement. It's a very strong movement. This book is called Simpatía por el Traidor. I don't know if you know this book. You know who the traitor is. You are the traitors, the translators. And the author, Marc Polizzotti, appears there and is translated by Íñigo García-Orieta. And this is happening more and more. And I want to mention this because I'm here in this school. When in documentation schools you learn how to catalog, you have to recognize the authorship of different people in a work, and translators are always included. It's a basic way of recognition. It's something basic for translators. In addition to what you said, when I see this book, this always comes to my mind, because for those of us who are older, sympathy, this reminds me to Sympathy for the Devil, a song by the Rolling Stones. And I'm wondering whether sympathy is a false friend there or not. I have a question for the two of you, because it comes from what Maria Jose said. I don't know if I understood this correctly. This is a field that I don't understand very well. In automatic translation, there are systems that can generate summaries based on articles. I'm not talking about translating the abstracts. There are tools that can summarize the article itself. Is that true? Yes. That's a direction that is being taken. And experiments are being carried out to try to widespread scientific contents produced in other languages. This is based, on the one hand, on language modeling. When machines start learning a language, that's what is considered a language model. When machines do this, they are capable of building, because they start learning grammar, vocabulary, they start understanding the ideas that are expressed. And this is combined with the structure of scientific texts that is very clear. In a scientific text, we have the intention, the objectives, the methods, and the conclusion. It is known the type of grammar structures that can be used, and based on that, systems learn and can extract the sentences that have more substance. And I was really surprised to see that many summaries are very expressive and very close to the summaries or the abstracts written by the author. This is the way that the quality control is measured right now, comparing both. And when I was talking about the generation of multilingual summaries, we usually think about translation from English into Spanish. But when there are language models for other languages, summaries may be generated in other languages. So the dissemination of those results of that science can be expanded very much. It's fascinating. It's a very fascinating world. Thank you very much, Elea. Someone asked for the floor back there.
Mi pregunta.
I have a question for Maria Jose. When it comes to the journalist, translator, journalist profile, someone who wants to carry out this job, what type of training should this person get? This is a very interesting question. And there is no easy answer. I know very different profiles. For example, people who studied translation and then studied a master's in journalism. And that's how you can reach the press rooms. Or you study journalism or communication and then you specialize in translation. Or simply you study journalism and you know languages and you start translating and learn by doing. There is no single way of doing this. I think interest and training, this is something that somebody said in the video. You have to be learning constantly. If you're interested in taking this path, little by little you will acquire the knowledge that will help you to develop yourself professionally.
Una última pregunta.
One last question before we run out of time.
Yo quería preguntar relacionado
I wanted to make a question in line with something that was asked before. We were talking about having the name of the translator in journalistic articles. Have you had the situation where the opposite happens? You've had to translate an article that you didn't agree with ideologically, and you didn't want your name to be mentioned.
Bueno, eso.
I didn't know who the question was for. I can answer. Usually, even though I disagree with the ideology, I translate it. And I remember once there was a book called Massage and Love, and I had to decide whether or not to have my name in it. And well, I can just tell you that there were some drawings in the book too. But yes, I agree with what my colleague just said. When we talk about newspapers, my biggest manipulation, inverted commas, was in a situation where, well, I was translated articles that were purchased by La Vanguardia from French thinkers like André Guzman and Bernard-Henri Lévy. Bernard-Henri Lévy has a very Baroque style around himself. So it was a little bit intense. And I was translating that, and I was like, if this guy repeats the same thing again and again, so I would like soften up the tone. I didn't do much. It's just that I didn't really make it so much about himself, and I would just like, make it lighter. I would tell myself that I was doing it for readability. Sometime afterwards, I received a letter from La Vanguardia. They told me that they had a letter from me, La Vanguardia, and there was this lady. I don't know anything about her. I never knew who she was. She was a reader from Geneva who was on holidays in Spain, and she read the article from Bernard-Henri Lévy, and she was congratulating me because she said that my translation was much more readable than the source. That was my intention, to make the text readable. That's my biggest manipulation as an author. We were hearing that we have read that Germans read philosophers in French because it was easier to understand. Well, thank you very much to the three speakers for this beautiful journey, and thanks for telling us about career options. Thanks to the former students, and thanks to everyone for the Q&A session. It is Paul and Rosario Martin Ruano are going to come here for closing the event.
Buenas tardes. Vamos a dar finalización a este encuentro con la clausura.
Good afternoon. We are going to close the event. As Bea said, we have Iris Hall, Professor also Martín Ruano, and José Luis Vega. First of all, I will give the floor to Iris Hall. We started out this event, Challenges of Multilingual Specialized Communication in the Digital Area. After the whole day, what we've heard in the 3 panels that have been very interesting, we could probably reshape this title by saying that this event could be called Opportunities of Multilingual Specialized Communication in the Digital Area. I think that opportunities, new professional profiles have become the leitmotif that I used from the German that hasn't been very represented or mentioned today. For this reason, I think this is the important approach with regard to the future of the degree, of the professional career for students, professionals, and researchers. I'm going to briefly make a quick overview of the 3 roundtables and the main conclusions that we can draw for students and future professionals of this field. And during the first roundtable, with Daniel Linder as a moderator, Jesus Torres told us that this paradigm that we are currently facing has given way to a new definition of translation. Linguistic cultural accessibility would be this new definition. This can be translated into other cultures, also languages, and other geographies. Accessibility is a redesign of the debate, and this is the challenge that linguistic professionals are currently facing. Silvia Rodriguez talked about the motto, less is more. She highlighted that this motto is the synonym of new skills, new transversal competencies that require professionals being able to synthesize and analyze. The capacity of summarizing and drafting texts. She also talked about the profile of clear multilingual communication expert, and she also talked about easy reading for whom. Gianluca from Trieste talked about 2 research projects related to legal language, the judicial Eurolect as a model for clarity, and the question is, does this context eliminate discursive pathologies? And he also presented his own research project that looks into the 3rd space created by linguist lawyers when they translate between different legal systems, when they work with the supranational European Union law. This 3rd space provides more accessibility to readers, as Gianluca explained, or the receiver of the information. Then we had Montserrat Beltran, who talked about the clear writing in the European context and talked about inclusive language and clear communication. During the second round table, Ima Aguilar reflected on the human right to science. She made the difference between scientific publications and scientific dissemination. This is interesting to translators because, as she explained, in scientific publications, the efficiency of publications is the focus. When it comes to scientific dissemination, translators have to play an important role when it comes to making knowledge closer to citizens. And this is something that has to be done in all languages and adapted to all cultures. She also talked about the dialogue between science and the crisis of experts, leading to a complex situation regarding scientific communication. Joaquín García Palacios from the University of Salamanca talked about the right to communication of Spanish experts, the other side of the coin. According to him, we need to be able to access quality terminology in Spanish that is validated, and he presented several projects and initiatives. Luis González from DGT highlighted the role of the European Union in the terminological consolidation, not only with regard to pure science, but also human sciences and social sciences, giving examples of how the Spanish of the European Union is contributing towards the language enrichment. Also, the importance of human teams when it comes to validating terminology. Vicent Montalt from the Universidad Jaume I introduced the specificities of the healthcare medical translation, focusing on the new needs put forward by customized medicine, patients' narratives that lead to new terms being born. Also, with regard to multilingual public healthcare, global healthcare, and the apps for patients. All of these represent new opportunities for language professionals. Third roundtable, and I forgot to mention that the second roundtable was moderated by Godel Sterk, our colleague here at the university. Third roundtable focused on the role of translation in media and the dissemination of specialized information to citizens. In this case, a distinction was set between different media through which scientific information is conveyed. In this regard, Elea Jimenez from the Scientific Council talked about the different formats and publications of scientific dissemination, not all of them in English. She highlighted the role of national publications and also the books that are written in other languages different to English. As well, the importance of these sources to be able to get to know research in all its wealth. María José Hernández Guerrero from the University of Málaga presented the profile of the journalistic translation, This professional profile is varied. We're not talking about the traditional translator. It is a journalist translator that must be able to adapt to several settings. As Maria José Hernández explained, these skills are specific. They go beyond just being able to translate. Finally, Juan Gabriel López from Universidad Autónoma of Barcelona has explained how the digital sphere has allowed us to overcome the limitations associated to journalistic translation. For instance, space limitations and time limitations. Once again, an advantage for the translator to be able to break down these barriers thanks to digitization. He also referred to the wide array of textual genres that are generating within this field. To summarize, I think that we can say that for students of this university, the professional market that awaits them is full of passion and excitement, and I'm sure that they will have all the tools and skills necessary to be able to access this market.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Professor Iris Hall, for this wonderful synopsis. I'm going to give the floor to Professor Rosario Martín Ruano.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dean. I'm going to take the floor and I'm going to show you some slides just to emphasize on the ideas that have been conveyed today. To sum up, I want to say that this meeting was very interesting, and throughout this meeting we reflected and we recreated new paths towards specialized multilingual communication. We heard about the need for multilingualism in an asymmetrical global system that requires understanding the diversity in languages, cosmovisions, identities, etc. But also, we reflected on the need for a specialized multilingual communication that calls for specialized trained professionals that can help us address these challenges in a responsible way with critical awareness and in an adequate way. There's another question that we pose ourselves. What is specialization, and what is required from our students and from ourselves when it comes to specialized multilingual communication? And this is very much connected to another Translating Europe workshops that we have celebrated in this venue. The one in 2016 focused on specialization as challenge and choices in specialized training for translation. In 2019, we talked about the world of freelance translation. We based our opinions in the Optimale project that we developed with Fernando Toda, who's the actual culprit of the fact that we are in the EMT network and the fact that we are holding events like this one here today. There we saw that multilingual and multicultural societies and multidiverse societies in this digital era, these last adjectives are new, because in 2016 we didn't have translation in our cell phones. So we see that specialization requires for a new type of conceptualization and a new approach in classrooms and in terms of lifelong learning. We saw that when we talk about, we used to think about training as a linear way, as a single discipline process where you would specialize in economy or law. What we see now currently is that there are interconnected fields, various diverse fields, heterogeneous fields that are interconnected, and we need new approaches, interdisciplinary approaches that can be reached in different ways. We have heard that people access translation from different routes, but we have also heard that you don't only get there through those different routes, but that you need constant synergies and interrelationships between the different stakeholders, experts, multiple identities, and multiple sectors. That's why the specialization in translation, in those previous meetings, we heard that it was a complex process between practices that are interdisciplinary, and the processes are constantly changing, and there are technology processes that will call for very different levels and skills. Professionals will need to be versatile, and professionals and professors need to carry out lifelong learning processes, because markets are global and ever-changing. I'm going to repeat this slide that I showed in the beginning. So all of this is the reason why we have the updated framework of competences of the EMT that we have the honor of belonging to. In this era, characterized by technologization, we need technological skills. Translators and intercultural mediators need these skills, but we make a special emphasis on having basic competences like linguistic competences, language training, general culture, and mediation capacities, the capacity to mediate between cultures. In this competences framework, as it has been mentioned here very clearly, is very diverse. And this is particularly so when it comes to Spanish language, that is a polycentric language. We have a global market that is very wide, and there are multiple directions and multiple information needs. That's why it seems like the formula that we talked about the meeting in 2016 is still valid today. The translators that we teach here and the ones that are teaching us, because we learned very much from our former students, so we are seeing that it's clear that we need a very solid training. The mother tongue and general culture is very important, because translators must be people who are curious in nature. We have also heard about how important it is to be specialized in different fields and modalities, but fields are ever-changing, and often translators are on the forefront of knowledge, and we are sometimes translating things that not even experts know about. And there's another aspect that has been made clear, and that is that we need cross-cutting and transferable skills, as it has been included in the competence framework of the EMT. So we know that we need professionals that are curious, versatile, capable of adapting, that have an lifelong learning goal, and who are the capacity to specialize in an autonomous way, and people who are capable of networking. So this is all of these things we have talked about today. In my initial slides, I was telling you that the competence framework sets what students need to know as translation professionals. They need to know how to translate specific and general texts, and not only texts, but also different formats. But particularly translators and all language profiles, and all of us who want to keep learning how to be translators in a changing world, we need how to be able to interact in networks, to know what how the market's doing. And the EMT Competence Network says that this can be can be achieved by networking with other translators and language service providers. For example, via professional associations, events, and social media. For example, right now we are having streaming thanks to the interpreters. I want to thank the interpreters, by the way. And as the framework says, we need to go over the current status of practices and improve and propose improvements for the future. I think these 3 panels have been fascinating. We are taking home a broad set of knowledge, and we are going back home with many answers, but particularly we're taking home questions. We're taking home contacts and the willingness to keep exchanging in the future. I think we're going to wrap up this meeting very happy because of everything we learned, but we want to keep dialoguing and we want to have further opportunities to dialogue. So I want to use my last minutes to thank you. I'm really grateful that we have been able to have this discussion thanks to the generous support from the DGT of the European Commission, and more particularly want to thank José Luis Vega and Luis González, who facilitated this meeting. We also want to thank institutions like the FESIC and FESIC that contributed with different visions of those discipline sectors that translators and language mediators have to serve. Thanks to renowned researchers, thanks for colleagues from other universities and members of the EMT network. As you were able to see, students have very important roles in professional associations, in scientific associations, and in our profession. Our students are an example of versatility and capacity to adapt. But we have also learned, and this is something that I do constantly in my classes, we have learned from students, and we have learned from the volunteer students and from the students who made wonderful questions that gave us food for thought. Let us keep thinking about the future. As the Dean will announce, shortly we will have our legal translation seminar. It's being coordinated by Dan Linder. We have a event production that is constantly active, and we will also hold the meeting of the EMT network on the next fall. This is another of the events. We are going to keep translating, and we will keep talking about translation. And from this university, we are going to contribute to, on the one hand, teach, on the other hand, keep learning from those that we teach, and we will keep getting together and meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Martín Ruano. Now I'm going to give the floor to José Luis Vega. I'm not going to introduce him again because you all know him by now. Thank you very much. I don't know what else to add. Iris and Rossi explained everything very well. I spent my time taking notes and organizing my notes because I wanted to do what Iris did. I'm too old to take notes and underline things, but I will keep my notes with lots of care because it will help me, these notes will help me to not forget about all the interesting things that were said here. I'm going to summarize the summary and add a few things that I wanted to add to what Iris and Rossi said. Iris, I really liked your synthesis about the challenges and the opportunities. That's a very relevant outcome, and it's an outcome or a conclusion that opens many perspectives. We need to talk with optimism because the young people here are the protagonists of these events. We can contribute with our knowledge, and our knowledge is at your service. I noted a few things that Iris already said. The three roundtables were fascinating and complemented each other. What are you going to say when you are closing a meeting? Of course, you have to say that, but no, I'm honest. I really like the three of them, and I want to emphasize the tone, the feisty tone in the second panel about terminology, communication, and specialized communication understood as a common good interest. This is something that we shouldn't lose track of. We have heard about automated machine on different occasions. Joaquin was talking about the terminological disadjustment in neuronal translation, automated translation. We have seen that in the commission. We saw when we moved to neuronal translation, automated neuronal translation, things sounded better, but they were very subtle traps. For example, we don't have the strict terminological translation that we saw when we had statistic translation. And for us, consistency or coherence is very important, and that's one of the main traps. But if we talk about automated translation, or if I'm talking about this, is because I don't want to go home without mentioning e-translation, which is the automated translation tool developed by the European Union that is developed with our money, our money as what we pay as taxpayers. And I think that in many aspects is better than the good commercial products that we all know. So I want to invite the audience and all students, because if you have an email from any university, you can access e-translation. It's practically open to everyone. You just have to log in with university email address, and you're going to be surprised at how well it works. It's a public tool paid with public money, so it guarantees the safety and confidentiality of data. If you send a regular text, as you do if you send a text to DeepL or Google Translate, the text stays there for the benefit of the companies that are behind it. In the case of e-translation, this is not the case. The information is better protected, so I want to encourage you to give it a chance, because you're going to be surprised in a positive way. Vicente talked about the potential of automated translation in his field, in the medical and health field. And on WhatsApp, I asked my assistant to send me all the motors covered by e-translate, and there's one from public health that is very complete and was carried out for the translation center that translates for all the medical and health agencies, among which the European Drug Agency. And I think this can be very useful for your masters. And on a different note, I loved Juan Gabriel tell this example. He was saying, and I'm quoting him, "I don't understand anything that is said here." And this is a message that is very positive for young people. It's wonderful to hear a translator who has over 30 years of experience say, "I don't understand what it says here." In the case that Juan Gabriel mentioned, the reason why he couldn't translate it is because it was not understandable. And we have also heard a lot about technology and the human factor. This human intervention is something that we should never lose track of. Since the inauguration this morning to now, we have mentioned different times how the tools that are developed by humans should be at our service and not the other way around. This is something that we should remember constantly. Luis was asking me to mention something, and I think he asked me very rightfully so. We have this thread, and we should remember what happened last year at the end of the pandemic. We had the first hybrid Translating Europe workshops. We were still wearing face masks, and we had these two workshops that complemented each other. The first one was in the representative of the Commission in Barcelona, and the second one in Madrid. And those workshops were on the economic and social challenges of translation, and another one was on the technological challenges.
The main protagonists were the associations of translators and translation agencies. The information is on YouTube, on the internet. Check out the European Commission headquarters in Madrid. These videos have been viewed many times, as I'm sure will happen with this event too. And well, I don't have anything else to add. It is a pleasure for me to come to see firsthand that learning happens quickly, and also to be privileged to have been here and to receive all this information by all these interesting experts and speakers. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, José Luis. Just a brief note so that we can finish on time. For us, it is an honor to have welcomed this seminar. We have reflected on the challenges of multilingual specialized communications in the digital area, new scenarios and translation professional profiles. First of all, we would like to thank the European Commission DGT for boosting this initiative that has made possible these encounter between different academic, scientific, institutional stakeholders, students, teachers, regarding these current challenges where translation has an important role to play. We also would like to thank CSIC, and representatives of universities that are present here for their participation and interesting contributions to this debate. Framed within the Translating Europe workshops and organized by the team that is part of the Intercultural and Translation Master, led by also our colleague Rosario Martín Ruano. We also want to thank a wide array of collaborators, students who've worked very, very hard as volunteers, the personnel from staff and services, digital innovation department. Some people have been here today, yesterday, etc., working very hard, students, interpreters, so many people who have made this possible. I want to personally thank two people, Rosario Martín Ruano and Daniel Lindell, former director of the Master. Without their hard work, this event wouldn't have been possible. They have both worked very, very hard to make it happen.
Bueno, sin duda alguna, la reflexión.
The reflections that have been reached thanks to this event have been very interested. We have highlighted them during the summaries provided at this closing panel. At the same time, they have posed many questions related to translation challenges that will allow us to continue moving forward in this field. I do not belong to this sphere, as you know, but I think you have to continue working hard, intensely. As so many questions have been posed, we want to highlight the availability of this university to be able to hold any events, meetings on this matter or similar matters, anything that has to do with training, permanent learning in these fields, etc. We hope to be able to count on you, on your attendance in the future. With regard to the events that Rossi has mentioned before, the 9th edition of the legal translation event that will take place on the 27th of February to the 3rd of March. We expect you to come. Secondly, the gathering that will take place in autumn, together with the next meeting of the universities that are part of the RET, or hosted by the DGT. We want to thank once again the European Commission for the trust placed on the University of Salamanca. During this event, we will be gathering 70 representatives of these universities that are part of the European Masters Network. The Faculty of Translation is a dynamic, welcoming site. This is thanks mainly to our students. We are very happy to be able to collaborate with regard to the progress of knowledge. We once again want to convey our gratefulness and thanks to your presence and collaboration. We consider this event to be closed. Thank you very much.